Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Kevin Mann, President and Chief Investment Officer with SmartTrust, Unit Investment Trust, to discuss three thematic areas that could potentially be the leaders in the economy as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we get into that, Kevin, did you expect stocks to be anywhere where they are right now?
It's hard to believe that they've rallied as much as they have coming off that March 23rd low. Many believe right now that there could be a V-shaped recovery for the economy as a result of the gradual reopening of various states throughout the course of the country. Some believe it'll be more U-shaped. I think it's going to be more swoosh-shaped. So I believe that the markets have rallied a little too high, too fast, but there are still some opportunities ahead, specifically in three thematic areas.
And tell us about those.
Sure. There's going to be a number of societal and economic changes coming out of COVID-19, clearly, Jill, both in terms of how we interact as a society and how we transact businesses globally. But those companies that can adapt best to those changes are likely to be the leaders of the new American economy coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Those companies that operate in the following three areas: e-commerce, technology, and biotech.
Yeah, and we've seen those kinds of companies that were leading the way prior to COVID-19 certainly led us through that recovery. So with that said, and where they're trading right now, and valuation, of course, comes into question, what are some of the risks associated with that thesis?
Well, I guess the risk really becomes if, in fact, the virus continues to spread, and if the spread of the virus forces different states to actually clamp back on some of the restrictions that were in place early on at the onset of the pandemic. But if you look at e-commerce in particular, at the end of 2019, Jill, e-commerce accounted for roughly 16% of total retail sales. That's double what it was just a couple years ago. In April alone in the US, it accounted for nearly 50% of daily online sales. We think that trajectory is going to continue coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. But you can't just focus on the Amazons of the world or the e-tailers. You need to look at the whole e-commerce ecosystem, recognizing the credit card companies, the payment processors, the warehouses, the distribution centers, the distribution companies. So take a much more diversified, holistic approach to looking at the e-commerce ecosystem.
We keep hearing about continued shutdowns, as you would imagine, record levels of unemployment. Of course, we have our election coming up and increased geopolitical tension. So can you touch on a defensive strategy for investors who might be fearful of additional volatility over the next few months?
Sure, whether it's just with respect to the upcoming election or potentially the additional spread of the virus. There's many investors that we have spoken to who want to maintain exposure to the U.S. equities market, but also want some downside protection as well in the event that volatility starts to ramp up again. There's a couple of different ways that those investors can approach it. One is an age-old asset allocation strategy that allocates 60% to equities and 40% to fixed income or bonds. At SmartTrust, we take the opinion that you need to focus on quality, both in terms of how you select the stocks and how you select the bonds in the portfolio. Fixed income quality, we based on investment grade quality and U.S. issuers. On the equity side, we believe it's those companies with strong balance sheets, pay dividends, have a history of earnings growth, and an experienced management team. You may also want to look at those companies that are in sectors that have historically fared well during periods of market volatility, have strong balance sheets, and pay dividends as well. So whether you're risk on or risk off, we do believe there are opportunities in this market for investors.
All right, Kevin, great to have you with us as always. Thanks so much for joining me on Trade Talks.
My pleasure, Jill. Stay well.
Thank you. And thanks for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.